Before I tell you what happened beneath the Ozarks, I need you to understand something. Most people think caves are just empty holes in the ground. Dark tunnels. Underground rivers. Maybe a few bats hanging from the ceiling. That's what I believed too. Even after years of exploring abandoned mines, flooded passages, and cave systems most people would never dare enter, I still thought every mystery had a logical explanation. Every strange sound could be traced to moving water. Every shadow had a source. Every story about creatures hiding underground was just another local legend passed around campfires. That belief lasted until October of last year. The Ozark Mountains stretch across Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Above ground, they are beautiful. Endless forests. Rolling hills. Crystal clear rivers cutting through valleys that seem untouched by time. But below the surface lies something entirely different. The Ozarks contain thousands of caves, many of them unmapped. Some connect to vast underground networks that extend for miles. Others disappear into sections nobody has fully explored. Over the decades, countless stories have emerged from these caves. Most are dismissed as folklore. People talk about hearing voices underground where no one should be. They describe seeing lights moving deep inside sealed passages. Some claim entire sections of caves seem to shift and change when explorers return. Most people laugh at those stories. I used to be one of them. It started when I received an email from a retired surveyor named Richard Hale. The subject line simply read, "You're looking in the wrong places." At first I ignored it. A week later another message arrived. Then another. Eventually curiosity got the better of me. Richard claimed he had spent nearly 20 years mapping cave systems throughout the Ozarks. According to him, there was one location that had never appeared on any official survey. He said government maps deliberately excluded it. He attached several photographs showing what appeared to be a narrow cave entrance hidden behind dense vegetation. The final line of his email stuck with me. "If you go there, don't follow the sounds." No explanation. No context. Just that warning. Naturally, that made me want to investigate even more. After several weeks of correspondence, Richard agreed to meet in person. He lived in a small town near the Arkansas-Missouri border. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and outsiders immediately stand out. When I arrived, he looked older than I expected. Thin. Exhausted. Nervous. What struck me most wasn't his appearance. It was the way he kept checking the windows. Every few minutes his eyes drifted toward the glass as if expecting someone, or something, to be watching. We talked for nearly 3 hours. Most of it sounded reasonable. Geological formations. Underground water systems. Historical surveys. Then the conversation changed. Richard lowered his voice. He told me there were sections of the Ozarks where cave explorers routinely disappeared. Not hikers. Not tourists. Experienced professionals. People who knew exactly what they were doing. Official reports usually blamed accidents. Falls. Flooding. Disorientation. But Richard believed something else was happening. He slid a worn notebook across the table. Inside were dozens of handwritten entries dating back nearly 30 years. Names. Coordinates. Descriptions. Every entry documented strange encounters underground. Many explorers reported hearing footsteps behind them. Others described distant conversations echoing through passages despite being miles from the nearest human being. Several claimed they encountered figures standing at the edges of their lights. None of the descriptions matched. Yet all of them shared one detail. The eyes. Every witness described unusually reflective eyes watching from darkness beyond the reach of their lamps. I asked Richard if he believed these reports. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened the notebook to a page marked with a red tab. A photograph had been taped inside. The image showed 4 cave explorers standing beside a rope descent. The picture seemed normal until I noticed something in the background. Far behind the group, deep inside the tunnel, a pale shape stood partially concealed behind a rock formation. At first I thought it was another person. Then I zoomed in. The proportions were wrong. Far too tall. Far too thin. Its head appeared elongated. And its eyes reflected the camera flash like an animal's. I looked up. Richard was already watching my reaction. "That was taken in 1998, he said quietly. "What happened to them?" His answer sent a chill through me. "They never came back." The next morning I decided to visit the location mentioned in Richard's notes. The cave entrance was difficult to find. Dense forest surrounded the area. No trails. No signs. No indication anyone had visited recently. The opening itself was surprisingly small. Barely large enough for a person carrying equipment. Yet according to Richard, it connected to a much larger system below. I spent nearly an hour preparing gear before entering. Helmet. Backup lights. Extra batteries. Rope equipment. Emergency supplies. Everything looked routine. Everything felt routine. For the first 30 minutes, nothing unusual happened. The passage descended gradually. Moisture dripped from the ceiling. Water echoed somewhere in the distance. The environment matched countless caves I'd explored before. Then I noticed something strange. The cave walls had markings. Not natural formations. Scratches. Thousands of them. Long parallel grooves carved into the stone. Some appeared relatively recent. Others looked ancient. The deeper I traveled, the more numerous they became. Several sections looked as if something had repeatedly dragged sharp objects across the walls for years. Maybe decades. I documented everything with photographs. Still, I wasn't worried. There had to be a logical explanation. Then my radio stopped working. One moment it functioned perfectly. The next it produced nothing but static. I checked connections. Changed frequencies. Replaced batteries. Nothing helped. The signal simply vanished. At the time, I blamed the cave's depth. But later events made that explanation difficult to accept. About 2 hours into the exploration, I reached a chamber unlike anything shown on existing maps. The space was enormous. My light couldn't fully illuminate the ceiling. Massive stone pillars rose from the ground like supports holding up an underground cathedral. The silence felt unnatural. Even the dripping water had stopped. For several minutes I stood there documenting the chamber. That's when I heard it. A voice. Faint. Distant. Calling my name. I froze instantly. At first I thought it might be another explorer. But that made no sense. Nobody knew I was there. The voice came again. Soft. Almost whispering. It sounded exactly like Richard. The same tone. The same accent. The same voice I'd spoken with the previous day. Over here. The words echoed through darkness. I turned toward the sound. My light revealed nothing. Just empty stone passages branching deeper underground. Every instinct told me to ignore it. But curiosity can be dangerous. Especially underground. I followed the voice. Only for a few minutes. At least that's what I intended. The passage narrowed as I moved forward. The air felt colder. My footsteps echoed strangely, creating the sensation that someone was walking just behind me. Then the voice stopped. Suddenly. Completely. The silence returned. I checked my watch. And that's when I realized something impossible. According to the time, nearly 2 hours had passed. It felt like 10 minutes. Maybe 15 at most. Confused, I reviewed footage from my helmet camera. The recording made no sense. Large sections were missing. Entire stretches of exploration simply weren't there. One moment I stood in the large chamber. The next I appeared much farther underground. No transition. No explanation. Almost 90 minutes had vanished. I tried to convince myself there was a technical malfunction. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Then I noticed footprints. Fresh footprints. In the mud ahead. I wasn't alarmed at first. Another explorer must have entered recently. But when I looked closer, my stomach dropped. The tracks weren't human. They resembled footprints only in the most basic sense. Long. Narrow. With strange elongated impressions where toes should have been. And whatever made them was large. Much larger than a person. The footprints continued into darkness. One after another. Perfectly preserved. As if they had been made only hours earlier. I raised my camera and began documenting the trail. While recording, I accidentally zoomed into the distance. At first I didn't notice anything unusual. Then the image shifted. Near the edge of the light. Something moved. A pale figure. Standing motionless. Watching. The moment my camera focused on it, it stepped backward into complete darkness. And disappeared.
For several seconds, I remained frozen exactly where I stood. The pale figure had disappeared into the darkness, so quickly that my brain immediately tried to rationalize what I had seen. Every experienced explorer develops that habit. When something impossible happens, you don't jump to supernatural conclusions. You search for explanations. Shadows can distort shapes. Reflections can create illusions. Fatigue can affect perception. After spending hours underground, even experienced cave explorers can misinterpret what they're seeing. I told myself that was the answer. It had to be. But when I replayed the footage from my helmet camera, the feeling in my stomach changed instantly. The figure was there. Not for a split second. Not hidden in a blur. It appeared clearly enough to remove any doubt that something had occupied that section of the tunnel. Frame after frame showed a pale shape standing motionless near the edge of my light. The image quality wasn't perfect because of distance and low light, but one detail stood out immediately. The eyes. They reflected the camera's illumination with a brightness that didn't seem natural. They looked almost metallic. Worse, they appeared fixed directly on me. Not looking in my direction. Looking directly at me. The realization sent a cold wave through my chest. Whatever I had captured wasn't wandering through the cave. It wasn't startled by my presence. It wasn't running away. It had been standing there watching. I zoomed in further, hoping to identify some detail that would make sense of the situation. A helmet. Equipment. Clothing. Anything that could indicate another explorer. Instead, the image became more disturbing. The proportions seemed wrong. The limbs appeared unusually long. The shoulders were narrow. The head looked slightly elongated. It almost resembled a person, but only in the same way a mannequin resembles a person. Similar enough to recognize. Different enough to feel deeply unsettling. I shut off the playback. Suddenly the cave felt much smaller. Much darker. Much quieter. For the first time since entering the system, I no longer felt alone. I decided immediately that the expedition was over. No discovery was worth pushing further under those conditions. I had collected enough information, enough photographs, enough video footage. Whatever existed deeper within the cave could remain unexplored. I turned around and started retracing my route. At first everything appeared normal. The tunnel stretched ahead exactly as I remembered. Moisture dripped from the ceiling. Small pools of water reflected the beam from my headlamp. My footsteps echoed softly against the stone walls. Yet after several minutes, a strange feeling began creeping into my mind. The tunnel seemed longer than before. Much longer. I checked my watch. According to my memory, it should have taken less than 10 minutes to return to the large chamber. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Still no chamber. The passage continued winding through darkness. I stopped and examined my surroundings. Nothing looked familiar anymore. That alone wasn't unusual. Cave systems often contain repetitive formations that make navigation difficult. But something else bothered me. The scratches. Earlier, the walls had been covered with long parallel grooves carved into the stone. Now they were gone. Completely gone. I swept my light across both sides of the passage. Smooth rock. Natural formations. No scratches. No marks. No signs that they had ever existed. My breathing became heavier. I knew what I had seen earlier. I had photographed those markings. Documented them. Studied them. Yet now there was no trace of them. Trying to stay calm, I pulled out my camera. The photographs remained. Image after image clearly showed the scratched walls. The evidence existed in my hands. Yet the physical location around me had somehow changed. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then another realization struck me. The tunnel in the photographs didn't match the tunnel surrounding me. Not exactly. Certain rock formations were missing. Others appeared in different locations. The differences were subtle. Small enough that most people would never notice. But enough to convince me that I was no longer standing where I believed I was. A growing sense of panic began building inside me. Getting lost underground is every explorer's nightmare. Above ground, mistakes can often be corrected. Underground, mistakes become deadly, especially inside an unmapped cave system. I checked my compass. The needle spun slowly before settling. Then it began moving again. Back and forth. Back and forth. As if unable to decide which direction was north. I tapped the device. No change. The compass continued behaving erratically. One piece of equipment failing could be explained. Two pieces of equipment failing was concerning. But now my camera timestamps, radio communication, navigation references, and compass readings were all behaving strangely. The deeper implications were difficult to ignore. I continued walking. The alternative was standing still and accomplishing nothing. After another 20 minutes, I finally reached a larger passage. Relief washed over me. Until I noticed something lying on the ground. A backpack. Old. Covered in dust. Partially collapsed with age. I approached cautiously. The material appeared weathered. Years old at least. One shoulder strap had torn completely away. The zipper was rusted shut. Near the side pocket, faded letters remained barely visible. I brushed away dirt. My stomach dropped. The backpack belonged to one of the missing explorers listed in Richard's notebook. I recognized the name immediately. Daniel Mercer. Disappeared in 2009. Presumed dead. No body recovered. No explanation found. Yet somehow his backpack sat directly in front of me. Miles beneath the Ozarks. Far from any mapped route. I searched the contents. Most items had deteriorated beyond recognition. Water damage had destroyed notebooks. Metal tools were heavily corroded. But one object remained intact. A small digital recorder. The battery compartment looked surprisingly clean. Out of curiosity, I inserted spare batteries from my equipment pack. The screen flickered, then powered on. To my astonishment, several audio files remained. Most were corrupted. Static. Fragments of conversation. Unintelligible noise. Then I found the final recording. The timestamp matched the day Daniel disappeared. I pressed play. For several seconds, only footsteps echoed through the speaker. Then Daniel's voice emerged. Calm at first. Professional. He described passage dimensions.
Rock formation.
Routine survey information. Nothing unusual. Then his tone changed. Someone's down here. Silence followed. A few seconds later he spoke again. I can hear them moving. More footsteps. Breathing. Then another voice entered the recording. A voice that didn't belong. The sound was faint. Distorted. Yet the words were clear enough to understand. Help me. Daniel stopped speaking. The recorder captured only his breathing. The unknown voice repeated itself. Help me. Again. And again. Each repetition sounded closer. 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 Then Daniel whispered something that made my skin crawl. That's my voice. The recording erupted into chaos. Running footsteps. Heavy breathing. Equipment rattling. Then a scream. Not Daniel's scream. Something else. Something louder. Something wrong. The audio ended abruptly. I stood motionless in the darkness, listening to silence. The implications were horrifying. Whatever existed down here had apparently been imitating voices for years. Maybe decades. Perhaps longer. Suddenly Richard's warning returned to my mind. Don't follow the sounds. At the time, I thought it was merely superstition. Now it sounded like survival advice. I placed the recorder into my pack and continued forward. The cave remained silent for nearly half an hour. No voices. No movement. Nothing. Then I heard a sound behind me. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. One step. Then another. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped. My pulse accelerated. I turned around. Nothing. Only darkness stretching endlessly behind me. I resumed walking. The footsteps returned, exactly matching my pace. Step for step. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed down, they slowed down. Always maintaining the same distance. Always remaining just outside visual range. For nearly 15 minutes, the invisible follower remained behind me. Then, without warning, the sound vanished completely. The silence felt worse. At least footsteps confirmed a location. Silence left endless possibilities. I continued moving until the tunnel widened into another massive chamber. This one was unlike anything I had ever seen. The ceiling disappeared into darkness hundreds of feet above. Towering stone columns rose from the ground. Underground streams cut through the chamber floor. The space felt ancient. Untouched. Almost sacred. Then my light landed on something impossible. Structures. Dozens of them. Arranged throughout the chamber. Not natural formations. Not geological features. Structures. Large stacks of stones positioned deliberately. Some formed circles. Others resembled crude pillars. A few looked disturbingly similar to shrines. The workmanship appeared primitive yet intentional. Someone or something had built them. And there were hundreds. I slowly moved among them. The further I explored, the stranger they became. Many contained animal bones. Some held rusted equipment. Others displayed objects recovered from the surface. Old watches. Flashlights. Knives. Pieces of clothing. Every structure appeared to contain offerings. Or trophies. The distinction depended entirely on perspective. Then my headlamp illuminated something standing at the far end of the chamber. A figure. Motionless. Watching. I froze. The figure stood nearly 7 feet tall. Its skin appeared pale gray. Its limbs were unnaturally long. Its posture seemed wrong somehow, as though it wasn't accustomed to standing upright. For several seconds neither of us moved. Then another shape emerged beside it. Then another. And another. My blood turned cold. There wasn't one figure. There were many. At least 6 stood scattered among the stone structures. Completely silent. Completely still. Watching me from across the chamber. None approached. None moved. They simply observed. Like predators evaluating prey. Or researchers studying a specimen. The atmosphere felt unbearable. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. Slowly, I began stepping backward. One careful step at a time. The figures remained motionless. Watching. 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 Then somewhere behind me, a familiar voice echoed through the darkness. Richard Hale. Perfectly replicated. Don't turn around. The words came from directly behind my shoulder. Close enough to feel breath. And in that moment, I realized the figures in front of me had never been the real threat. Because something else had already managed to get behind me.